So let me introduce the rest of our panel. Dr. Vartan Gregorian is president of the Carnegie Corporation of New York, which is a philanthropic foundation. Dr. Gregorian has spent all his professional life, or most of his professional life, I should say, working in education. So he's a fount of knowledge. Her Excellency Naledi Pandor, who is a South African Member of Parliament and currently Minister of Science and Technology in South Africa, but she was formerly the Minister for Education. And Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Director of the Earth Institute, Professor of Sustainable Development and Health Policy and Management at Columbia University, and a Special Advisor to the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Now, in this debate, we are going to address key questions related to the role of education in economic and social development. Also, how can we accelerate getting kids into school in those areas where they don't have access to education? And also, we're going to be looking at how technology is transforming education and getting other sectors involved in this crucial area. Now, let me start with you, Dr. Gregorian. 3 years ago, you and a group of other educators wrote an open letter to President Obama, in which you said, education is central to our democracy. You can neglect it, you can get it on the cheap, but you get what you pay for. And if you think that education is costly, try ignorance, because that will be far costlier. What is the cost of ignorance?
Well, when President Obama got elected...
You just need to point it towards your mouth, actually, and then it will work.
When President Obama got elected, we initiated a meeting of 47 heads of education systems, higher education systems in the United States, out of 50 states. And we issued this letter, public letter, urging him to start with universities as a way of renovating American society's education establishment, infrastructure, social fabric, and everything, especially K-12 education. And we said those words, and unfortunately, I don't think they followed our advice or our request or our urging. And I was prompted in drafting that letter, collective letter, by the example of Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, who in the middle of the Civil War, when America lost 600,000 people in 1862 on, he established land-grant universities in the United States, which prepared America for an industrial revolution. In the middle of Civil War, 1862-63, he established the National Academy of Sciences. He did not say we're in the midst of war, this is luxury, because science and education were a necessity, not a luxury. And that's why we're trying to emphasize that during terrible times, you have to think the important things for the future. Not out of reaction, but out of planning. As to cost of ignorance, neglect always brings not immediate results, but ultimate outcomes. Neglect in terms of aspirations not met. Neglect in terms of potential talent not satisfied. Neglect new generation of Americans who come aboard not being educated, receiving equal opportunity. Neglect about quality, how to satisfy quality of education. And all of those was to emphasize the fact that most politicians know the price of everything, but not the value of everything. And that was our attempt to draw attention to neglect.
Naledi Pandor, from your current position as Minister of Science and Technology in South Africa, how important do you now see the education sector in the development of your economy?
I think as Minister of Education, we had recognized the links that there must be between ministries of education and science and technology. And now the link is even more critical because the young people I draw on for researchers, for innovators, have to come through the school and university system. Thus, we have to collaborate, science and technology and education, to ensure that we get the competence and the numbers able in science as well as in mathematics and, of course, information communication technologies in order that we build that base. of undergraduates for advancing into engineering, biotechnology, and all the fields. Our interest is, of course, postgraduate, very strongly. So you want to get your young people into honors, masters, PhD programs, but without that filter from the school system, your ambition is actually curbed tremendously. So the relationship is absolutely vital.
Jeffrey Sachs, you wrote a very interesting article I read on the plane a couple of weeks ago in Time magazine about reviving the American middle class. And in that you made the point that there has to be a link between skills levels and wage levels, and that involves investing in education. Do you think the problem, I'm not asking you just here to focus on America, but governments in general often see education as a cost on their balance sheet and not as an investment?
The facts of our labor market in the United States, but I think it's true worldwide, are very, very clear, which is that in the United States, if you want to have a middle-class life, you need a bachelor's degree now. The jobs with only a high school degree don't afford anything like the living standards that Americans generally have aspired to in the past. This is the nature of the new global economy. But here is the shock, and here's why countries shouldn't follow the American example right now. We've stopped investing properly in our society, just as Vartan has said. Only 32% of our 25 to 29-year-olds achieve a bachelor's degree. Many other countries are surpassing that now. And among our minority groups, Hispanic males have a bachelor's degree only among 10% of the 25 to 29-year-old Hispanic males. And among African American young men aged 25 to 29, only 15%. Our society is being pulled apart in inequality. Our democracy is being degraded by ignorance. We are subject to lots of corporate propaganda about anti-scientific things because the population is not properly educated. Every society better put education as its most primary focus. It's the highest return for the economy and the highest return for society. And there's no way to have a country of good governance or a prosperous economy in the 21st century without an educated population. And the American people and America's crisis right now shows you can have everything, but you can give it all away if you stop this kind of investment. And that's the tragedy that the United States is showing right now. It's showing a bad example, not a good example. The world's leading technological power, giving it up by greed, selfishness, and short-sightedness, leading to the loss of investment in what made the prosperity in the first place. It's extremely dangerous, and every society in this world should take note. If you want to make it, educate your children, start young, even before school, because the biggest returns are early childhood development, and then help your kids get through and help them get a university degree. And remember that as bad as the crisis in the United States, which is a tragedy for a rich country, being killed by greed, unfortunately, if you look at the crisis in other poorer regions of the world, their kids don't even have a basic chance because of poverty. And in sub-Saharan Africa right now, only about 20% of girls are even finishing a high school education. This will be devastating for Africa unless this is changed.
I wanted to come on to that, actually, because I want to talk about the Millennium Development Goals, and in particular, goal number 2, which is to have universal primary education for all children in the world by 2015. But Natalie Pandor, we're not going to reach that, are we? We're not going to reach that goal.
Yeah, well, certainly not all countries in the world are going to reach that goal. in South Africa, we had done a great deal with respect to bringing young people into schooling, and we have parity at the primary and secondary levels. And interestingly, more young women are going into higher education, but our concern is they continue to go into the social sciences and the humanities and not into engineering or the natural sciences. So this is a worry that we have. So the numbers have begun to improve, but in the majority of African countries, the statistics are rather different.
Is it a useful tool? As a government minister, do you find having this tool useful?
Well, I think goals are important, and that's where I actually appreciate the MDGs. I think they were a very ambitious set of goals, but what they have done is they've assisted in focusing governments on what needs to be done. So all of us are attending to the key objectives of the MDGs, and you have a set of criteria upon which you regularly report. So I think they have focused the minds of government. Perhaps what wasn't attended to sufficiently was for those countries that are unable to marshal the resources necessary to achieve the goals, how does the global community draw together in order to assist them? So essentially what's happened is countries that are able have begun to achieve a number of the goals, and those that were lagging behind continue to lag behind. So I think as we relook at what needs to be done, we really should be focusing upon the most vulnerable, the most excluded, and marshalling global resources to ensure that they meet the objectives. Because we must change the world for everyone and not just for some.
Vartan Gregorian, is there a danger, do you think, that if you don't reach these goals, they become a benchmark for failure?
Well, I've always been worried that great powers promise things they don't deliver. UN promises, does not deliver. The result is devastating. Jeff Sachs is the conscience of millennium giving, but in terms of others keeping this flame up, because people get disillusioned, people give up, and people don't even feel guilty for doing this because there are always other priorities, national priorities, what are international commitments, and those are things short-sighted, because in the long run we have to know the world has no borders anymore. What happens somewhere is going to affect everywhere. But in that connection, I think the private sector has much to contribute. I'm very proud to be head of Carnegie Corporation because Andrew Carnegie believed that education is necessary for democracy, democracy is necessary for international peace, and also that war is a blot on human civilization, has to be wiped out through education and others. So the result is we invest, 10 foundations have come together, 7 foundations, invested $450 million in sub-Saharan Africa, and today we are retraining the next generation of professors because most faculty members do not have PhDs or some even masters, and we're trying to have next generation. At the same time, one of the greatest pride of mine is that we have now 5,600 women who are in universities in sub-Saharan Africa, thanks to Carnegie Corporation, all expenses paid.
Now that's a fantastic achievement. Let me just bring Professor Sachs in here because you were involved in drawing up the Millennium Development Goals. I mean, how did you agree on this date, 2015? What made you think that it would be achievable to get universal primary education by then?
Well, these are goals that were adopted by the member states of the United Nations, and they were drawn up during a number of conferences during the 1990s. There's nothing hard about achieving these goals. We could still achieve all of these goals by 2015. What's happened, though, is that powerful countries have reneged on their promises. The United States is spending 30 times more on the military than it is on development assistance. It doesn't get security out of that. It's just a profound misallocation of national effort to spend more than $700 billion on the military and spend really less than $30 billion on official development assistance. The world simply hasn't followed through on promises that were made. Now, poor countries are doing a lot, and I appeal to all countries, new donor countries as well. In this region, in Korea, China, Malaysia, other countries that are rising powers in the world, when the leading traditional powers like the United States are lagging, no longer leading, then other countries need to step up and do their part. And unfortunately, the whole transatlantic region is in crisis right now. It's mainly a moral crisis, I would say. It's not an economic crisis so much as a moral crisis. But you have the US and Western Europe focused on their internal problems, and now the rest of the world has to go on and solve its problems, not waiting for the United States or Europe. And this region has resources. East Asia has resources. Brazil has resources. South Africa has resources. It's time for the new powers, the BRICS and others, to step up and say, okay, we'll take on some of this responsibility to make the world work properly, not just waiting for these countries that, like my own, which are squandering their inheritance by underinvestment and by too much military spending.
I'd just like to turn back to Your Highness. What would you like to see, briefly, this summit achieve over the next three days? What is your call to action?
Before that, I would like just to comment on what Jeff just said. It's very important that we don't set high expectations for the people here and people around the globe. I think, yes, maybe the resources are important, but I think they are not the only cause of our failure. I think we have really to look for more innovative, creative ways in applying our education to our new and different mentalities of today. We have to stop really using those old, obsolete methods for those young, talented individuals. So I think the education is not about, or not just about the MDG. It is a lifelong goal that all of us has really to dedicate ourselves to achieve.
Very briefly, Jeffrey.
I want to agree with that completely. The WISE is so special because it's putting an emphasis on innovation. And I can say, having been a professor at universities for 31 years now, the amount of change going on in educational technology and in the classroom is greater in the last 2 years than I would say in the preceding 29 years. What we can do now with information technology to reach students who couldn't have been reached before, to connect children around the world by internet and Skype, to have global classrooms, to have virtual education, to lower the costs and lower the barriers, is so profound that this is one of the key areas where we ought to put our emphasis. There is simply no excuse for kids not being part of the worldwide information age, because the costs are so small, and especially if leading technology companies join in this effort, then we'll reach everybody. And I think this is one of the most important initiatives of WISE, and one of the reasons why we're putting so much confidence in this initiative.
Thank you very much. Just very briefly, Your Highness, I know you have some feelings on the use of technology in education. Would you like to come in on that just before we wrap up?
Yes, I agree that technologies are important, but they should not be an objective or an end by themselves. As they are here, we have to use them. We have to utilize them to bring better quality of education to our kids and our youth, but they should not be our main objective. They are just tools that we need to really use and utilize. I think this is very important that everyone understands. Technology is important, but not everything. We have to build the infrastructure in our classrooms, in our schools, train teachers. We have really to look to the education as centered around the students, personalized education. Today we're talking about personalized medicine. I think the most important thing today it is to personalize and individualize education according to the abilities and according to the needs of every individual in this world. So I think this is the most important thing that we should emphasize on. In the end of the day, technologies are there, we can use them or not, but infrastructure are the most important elements.
Can I just apologize to my other panelists, because I know you have lots more to say, but unfortunately I'm being told that we have to wrap up. So I would like to thank Natalie Pandor, Jeffrey Sachs, Vartan Gregorian, and of course, Your Highness. Thank you very much.